Well, we are unraveling a truly chilling forensic mystery. We're going to break down a case that starts out with what looks like a totally straightforward confession, but it rapidly spirals into this wild psychological puzzle. We're talking damaged evidence, hidden voices, and honestly, the absolutely terrifying ways the human brain processes trauma. So let's dive right into this and see how a seemingly open and shut case completely fell apart. Okay, so picture this. It's exactly 1:12 in the morning. The police station is just dead quiet. Out of nowhere, a 32-year-old woman named Sabiha walks in, steps right up to the duty officer, and completely breaks the silence with a single, devastating sentence. "I killed my husband." It's so quiet, like completely void of any emotion whatsoever. But the physical reality of her actually standing there, well, that was telling a very different, much more chaotic story.
Just think about the sheer physical chaos of her arriving at the station. Her hair is an absolute mess. Her breathing is really rapid, really shallow. Her shirt is literally covered in blood. And, definitely the most alarming part, she was actually still holding the murder weapon right there in the station, a kitchen knife. So you have this stark contrast between her totally quiet, calm confession and this horrifying visual state. And that's exactly what sets off the very first alarm bells for the investigators.
Which brings us to part 1, the midnight confession. To really get what happened, we kind of have to follow Sabiha inside the interrogation room. Now, investigators, they're expecting panic, tears, maybe some frantic explanation about self-defense, right? But what they actually got was eerily different. Her story is just highly structured. She lays out these exact steps. Step 1, they argued. Step 2, he tried to control her. Step 3, he yelled. Step 4, she grabbed a knife. And step 5, she killed him. Sounds pretty logical on paper, but the interviewing officer noticed this really weird pattern. Every single time Sabiha reached that space right between step 4 and step 5, she'd pause. Just sit there in total silence for a few seconds before mechanically stating, "I killed him." The tone never changed. The speed didn't change. Honestly, it sounded way less like an actual memory and entirely like a rehearsed robotic script.
So, with a confession that felt maybe just a little too perfect, the police knew they had to verify her story. Let's move into part 2, the silent recorder. They head to the house, and the drawing room is literally a disaster zone. Investigators are finding broken glass absolutely everywhere. Chairs are violently overturned. It all points to a massive physical struggle. And right in the middle of it all is the victim, Sabiha's husband, Rashid. But lying right next to his body is something that immediately grabs the detective's attention, an old digital voice recorder.
Now listen to how this builds the timeline of that fatal night. The police power on the device, they press play. At the start, they hear the argument loud and clear. Rashid is screaming, "You can't go anywhere." Then, in the middle, you get these sounds of a violent scuffle, things are crashing around, and Sabiha's voice is just trembling as she begs, "Let me go." And then, right before the actual murder takes place, the audio just cuts out. Nothing but total, abrupt silence.
Which leaves us with this massive question. Who stopped the recording? Because, voice recorders don't just anticipate a murder and politely power themselves down, right? Someone in that violently chaotic room made the active, deliberate choice to reach out and manually press stop just seconds before Rashid was killed. But why?
The mystery of the stopped recorder was definitely baffling enough on its own. But then the medical examiner's report comes back. And that brings us to part 3, the forensic contradiction. This report brilliantly exposes the massive structural flaw in her story. Look, Sabiha's confession accounted for one thing, right? A fatal knife wound. But the actual forensic reality, Rashid didn't just have a knife wound. He had actually suffered massive blunt force trauma to the back of his head from some kind of heavy object. And Sabiha completely omitted this strike from her interrogation. She never once mentioned hitting him with anything heavy. So, armed with this huge new contradiction, the officer goes straight back into the interrogation room and asks her point blank, "Did you hit him in the head before grabbing the knife?" And according to the records, Sabiha's eyes just go completely blank. The whole rehearsed script totally vanishes. She goes quiet and then faintly whispers, "No, I can't remember." She wasn't being defensive or anything. She was genuinely, frighteningly empty.
At this point, the investigation has basically hit a brick wall of memory loss and contradictions. But it's about to crack wide open in Part 4, the hidden audio. 47. That is the exact number of seconds of audio that the killer thought they had destroyed. Luckily, a really sharp forensic tech back at the lab realized the recording hadn't been fully deleted at all. The end file was just heavily damaged. So after some painstaking, meticulous work, they actually managed to recover those final 47 seconds. And guys, what was on them changes absolutely everything we know about this case. Let's walk through this recovered audio step by step. It starts out with static, and then Rashed yelling. But then, out of nowhere, a third voice enters the room. A male voice screams, "Let her go." That's immediately followed by a sickening, heavy physical strike and the sound of Rashed collapsing. You can hear Sabiha crying in the background. And then, that unknown male voice issues a terrifying threat. "Listen, say exactly what I tell you, or you won't survive."
The entire narrative just completely flipped on its head. There was a third person in that room, someone who struck Rashed, someone who orchestrated the entire cover-up, and someone who forced Sabiha to memorize that robotic confession. Which brings us to our final part, Part 5, the terrifying truth. Who on earth was that third voice?
Well, to figure that out, investigators pulled Sabiha's phone records, and they found that earlier that evening, terrified for her life, Sabiha had sent a desperate SOS text message to her younger brother Nihal. It simply read, "He will kill me today." Nihal rushed over to the house and essentially arrived right in the middle of a violent assault on his sister.
When we piece together the true sequence of events, a completely different reality emerges. When Nihal walked in and saw Rashed beating Sabiha, he panicked, grabbed a heavy vase, and struck Rashed right in the back of the head. Boom! That is the blunt force trauma. Rashed falls. And at that exact moment, Sabiha, operating purely on adrenaline, rage, and absolute terror, grabs the kitchen knife. But what happens next? Nihal realizes what just went down. He knows that if the cops arrive, a joint murder charge is going to put them both away for life. So he manually stops the recorder, and he literally coerces his traumatized sister into taking the sole blame.
But here is the most fascinating and honestly heartbreaking psychological element of this whole explainer. Why did Sabiha have those weird pauses during her confession? Why did her eyes literally go blank? Well, it all comes down to a phenomenon called trauma-induced memory loss. When the human brain witnesses or actively participates in an incredibly extreme, violent event, it can essentially just short-circuit. It literally blocks out the memory entirely as a desperate survival mechanism.
At the very end of the recovered audio, buried way under the static, police heard Sabiha faintly crying, and she utters this deeply tragic sentence. "I really can't remember who struck the final blow." Because of the overwhelming trauma of that night, the abuse, her brother's violent intervention, the blood, Sabiha's brain simply fractured. She legitimately, honestly, did not know if the blow that ended Rashed's life came from the blunt force of her brother's vase or the knife in her own hands.
Which finally brings us to the end of this incredibly complex forensic puzzle. The interrogation room sits empty now. But the lesson here? It goes far beyond a broken voice recorder. See, forensic evidence can absolutely tell us the what and the how, but the human mind, well, it's infinitely more complicated. In the pursuit of justice, we tend to assume memory is just like a video camera. But as this case proves, sometimes people don't lie. They just live inside a truth too terrifying to remember. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other closed cases are hiding massive secrets right inside the fractured memories of a survivor? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time.